Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Novel Review, a literary podcast that discusses all things books. Today is no different. There will be a book, but to help me discuss this book is the author himself. The book is The Boulevard and the author is Jerrod Edson. Jerrod is a Canadian writer, poet and teacher, a bachelor's degree in literature and a postgraduate degree in education. Jerrod is the author of 6 books, with the 6th and latest being The Boulevard. Jerrod, it's so great to have you here on the show. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And this book was just fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to discuss it with you today. I'm going to do my best not to spoil it, but I do want to talk about everything. It's kind of frustrating in this situation because, yeah. But anyways, let's jump straight in. So
Sure.
before we discuss the book itself, I wanted to talk to you about the genre of the book because it's what's called speculative fiction. And I wonder if you could just give us sort of your understanding of what speculative fiction is and what drew you to speculative fiction.
First of all, speculative fiction is something that's not, it's basically, I was asked this question once before and I couldn't quite pinpoint it. It's basically anywhere between literary fiction and science fiction, science fiction fantasy. It's not based in the real world. You can have some magic in there or otherworldly things, but it's not necessarily in outer space either. I did an interview with another writer of speculative fiction about a month ago, and we were talking about spec fiction, trying to figure out what it was. And we came to the conclusion that it's just different. I dedicated the book to my dad, and you can see he said it's different, and it's kind of funny how he summed it up. It's just different. It's something that's out of the norm. I wasn't necessarily drawn to speculative fiction. This was just a story that I wanted to write. My other 5 books are all considered literary fiction. So I wasn't necessarily drawn to the genre. For me, it's just another book that I wrote.
No, that's fantastic. And we're definitely going to dive into a few of the things you mentioned there. But I thought just to sort of kick things off, would you mind giving us a brief overview of the book just to sort of set the scene?
Sure. It's funny. All my other novels I can kind of sum up in one sentence. This one I can't, no matter how many times
No,
I try to do it.
take your
Um,
time.
I can tell you how I came about with the idea, which will explain what it's
Perfect.
about. So I was working at a bookstore called Chapters in Canada. It was the big box bookstore when I was in university in Ottawa, and another big box store came in and bought out ours, and now the big box bookstore in Canada is called Indigo. At the time, it was during the buyout, and the new CEO, was coming into our store to I guess just to pay a visit. So our manager for about a week was just kind of running around, getting the store looking absolutely perfect. He was in a panic. At the time, I was one of those days I was in there helping out. I worked in the fiction section, and I was flipping through a Far Side calendar, that cartoon, The Far Side. I was
Mhm.
flipping through a desk calendar, and I came across one where it had a door, and Satan was on one side of the door, and there was a repairman on the other side of the door, and there was 999 on the door. And the repairman was saying, I'm paraphrasing, he was saying something like, I guess I read this upside down, and he had a work order or something. So I had a moment, what was going on at the store at the time, where I was just like, what if God visited hell for the first time and Satan is in a bind to get hell looking like hell should look because
Mhm.
he's been building it in a different way. It turns out he's been building it in the image of heaven, and he's got to destroy that or face God's wrath. So that was where I got the idea for the story. That's basically what it's about. As you know, the focus is mostly on Van Gogh's life. It's 3/4 of the book. So yeah,
Yes.
I can't sum it up in one sentence.
No, that's completely fine. The novel is lovingly dedicated to your father. And as you said before, he actually read an early sort of copy of this and said it's different.
Yeah.
you've just revealed that you sort of started thinking about this story when you were working in this bookshop. When did you actually sort of put pen to paper?
It was probably well over a decade. I'd always been making notes. I'd published 5 books in between this one. At the time, I just released my first. It was a really short, like a novella,
Mm-hmm.
135 pages or so, with a really small press on the East Coast when I was in university. I knew it was a good idea, and I also knew I wasn't ready to write it. I
Oh,
was at
good.
least smart enough to realize I didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
skills to write a novel like that. So I stuck to learning and got my degree and learned more and more. So it was about 2014. I sat down and just put a skeleton together. It was about 88 pages at the time. Then
Mm-hmm.
I waited another 2 or 3 years. I wrote a few more books in between there, and really put the meat on the bones. Probably about 2015, 2016, grew to 250 pages and eventually to a 400-page manuscript. So it was not necessarily, it didn't take me 20 years to write, but it was kind of always on the back burner for about 20 years and probably 3 years to sit down and write it out.
That I mean, that's such a long time, but that is fantastic. And the recognition of I have a great idea, but I can't write it yet because I'm not quite there yet is we'll come back to writing style actually. What
Sure.
I what I want to ask next is so you've sort of had this initial idea of, Satan being in a bind and he needs to get hell looking a bit more hellish. But where did then the idea come from of Van Gogh being this artist that's painted hell? Because while this novel is based in hell and it's set in hell and it's on this train ride in hell, and like you said, Satan's trying to get hell back looking to hell, it's also a story that sort of covers humans' artistic history. How did
Mhm.
that side of the book sort of come into it?
Well, once I had the idea that God was going to visit hell, I had to figure out what the problem was going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and why was Satan in a panic. And once I came to the idea that when Satan was cast out of hell, even according to Milton, he loved it. He wanted to take over. He didn't want to destroy it. He loved it. So I figured when he got to hell, he wouldn't settle for, lava and dirt and filth. He would want to build it in the image of heaven. And I had to think of what's the difference between heaven and hell. The very obvious response is light and darkness. So he had to figure out a way how to light, to kind of get heaven's light into hell. Then I went from there going, well, how am I going to do this? I realized I can't light all of the world of hell, so why not just light the main city of hell? And I've always been a big Van Gogh buff, and I'm a Hemmingway nerd. So I don't really know when I got the idea for the actual Boulevard itself. But once I realized I could write a novel with Van Gogh and Hemingway in it as characters, that's what really drew me in, because it was once I started, it was a ton of fun to write those characters.
I mean, it was a ton of fun to read them because I love sort of, especially in the early stages when you're just about to set out on the train ride and you sort of pass. Who is it? Is it Al Capone that you pass? Is it
Yeah,
Capone?
well, he keeps looking back. Well, certain there's things going on in the city while Satan is gone on the train, and it keeps going back to his to them preparing all the preparations that's going on with hell. And one of the things is that Al Capone kind of runs Capital City, um, and yeah, that was a weird one. Lives in the basement of a pizza joint.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you've got Bukowski for a couple of scenes there. You've got Jean Reese, who's sort of always lingering in the background, which
Yep.
is, I mean, it's just great to sort of revisit these characters. But then, of course, you've got the sort of historically fictive side of the story where you've got all the great artists through history. And I mean, that was a question I was going to ask is how did you settle on Van Gogh? But you've kind of already revealed it. But then, of course, you've got to sort of, I guess, justify why you're picking Van Gogh as opposed to Monet or Da Vinci or, the classics of Dutch art, Rembrandt and stuff.
Right.
Was it
Yeah.
difficult to
Well,
sort of go past them and justify why you're picking someone else?
it wasn't like I was drawn to. I wanted to use Van Gogh because I knew more about him than any other artist,
Mm-hmm.
and he was, to me, he's the most interesting. So it was always going to be Van Gogh. Part of the process of writing it out over a period of years is you get to think about it. You get to see
Mm-hmm.
your mistakes. And I picked Van Gogh and justified him over other artists like Da Vinci and Vermeer and those, because I found out in the mid 1800s the new pigments came along, and that really gave way for the impressionists. So that perfectly worked into the story, right? Basically, brighter paints, brighter pigments. That of course I was going to pick an impressionist, and it had to be Van Gogh. I didn't add the Monet piece until very late. Um,
Interesting.
it was just a couple years ago, and I realized my mistake was, if Satan was going to pick an artist to illuminate hell, it had to be Monet. I
Mm,
mean, over Van Gogh. But I
mm.
wanted to use Van Gogh, so I was like, how do I justify this? How do I justify Van Gogh over Monet? And even Hemingway in the book says, "Come on, like not Monet, like give me a
Yeah.
break." So I had to. How was how did Monet not qualify for the
Mm,
job? And the way I did it was Monet was too good that he discovered who Satan was,
mm.
right? And that's how I did that. But that came in, the whole Monet, all those Monet scenes came in very late. It was the last couple years, going through, realizing I needed to justify Van Gogh over Monet.
Just on that, is there a reason, because you say you added Monet in quite late, is there a reason you'd originally left him out of the text?
No, it's just an oversight on my part.
Okay.
Right, you go through, you write books, or write a long story, and there's so many things to think about. And
Yeah, yeah.
I just had, when I'm writing a new novel now, and I'm on my fifth draft of it, and in the car the other day I realized the ending doesn't work at all because one character doesn't connect, and I really, it's a big mistake, so I've got to fix it. And this was the same thing. I realized, like, I can't just go to Monet. How do I pass over, or I can't just go to Van Gogh. How do I
Mhm.
pass over Claude Monet? So I had to put that in there. It was just an oversight, and luckily I saw it. Right.
No, yeah, fantastic addition, fantastic addition. And then, of course, just Hemingway along for the ride because why not?
He was comic relief. Like I
Yes.
said, I'm a
Mm,
Hemingway nut, and I could have picked, a few versions of Ernest Hemingway. I picked the stereotypical egomaniac, the drunk.
mhm. Yeah.
I could have written him far more serious. I could have written him far more arrogant than he was.
Hmm.
I could have written him a number of ways. I wanted him to be comic relief in the book. He's fun, and his interactions with Satan, I thought, were fun and funny, and just to lighten it up because it's a pretty dark story.
Yeah, that it is. But no, I loved him there. I'm a big Hemingway fan as well. So like it was, I thought you actually wrote him really well, um, based on the stories that I've read. So kudos to that. What did you want to achieve with this novel?
Wow. I wanted to be happy with the finished product.
Hmm.
Um, hmm, Let me think. I'm trying to find a way to say this. What I wanted to achieve with the book was, when I initially had the thought that it was going to be a big book and I wasn't ready to write it, my goal was to get it written that until I was satisfied with it. And that was my goal with the book. Very selfish goal, but
No,
um, yeah, I don't know any better answer than that.
no, that's not selfish at all. You're the one writing it. Is it really tough? This story sort of spanned 20 years of your life, 10 years of sort of penciling down thoughts. I can't remember who it is that says, no piece of art is ever finished. It's just simply abandoned. Given that this has taken up pretty much your entire writing career, was it really tough to sort of close the book and say, okay, this is ready to go out into the world?
Yeah, it was really tough. I
Mm,
initially had another press that was very interested in it, and they were going to publish it. It was in 2017, and I kind of got to the end, and they were about to send proofs. I hadn't had a contract signed yet. They were going to send proofs, and I pulled the plug.
mm,
It wasn't a very amicable divorce, but it was the right thing to do. For instance, I didn't have the Monet in there. I
mm.
didn't know I
No,
was
yeah.
missing pieces, but I knew the book wasn't ready, and I shouldn't have been trying to publish it then. So when Lee Thompson at Galleon Books, I've known Lee for probably 12 years now. Um, I trusted him, and I was finally ready to let it go. I was trying to let it go for 5 years, but it felt complete at that point. So yeah, it was very difficult. The most difficult book I've ever had to let go of, for sure.
Wow. That's, I mean, just hearing that you nearly published it without the Monet parts is like,
There were a lot of parts. There were no parts with Emile Bernard. There was no
no.
funeral. Like Van Gogh's funeral wasn't there. Um, there were a lot of missing pieces, and I didn't know what the missing pieces were then,
Mhm.
but I just knew that it was thin and it needed to be finished.
Was there any panic after you sort of declined to have it published? Because then there was sort of like this pressure of, okay, they wanted to publish it. I could have just done that and moved on with my life, but now I've got this pressure of I need to actually add something to this book. If I'm
Uh,
stopping it being published for a reason, I need to add something to it.
yeah, no pressure. I was sure of the decision when I made it.
Mm.
It wasn't a tough decision. I wasn't ready to let it
Okay,
go, and and,
that's good.
and I knew the book wasn't ready, so there was no pressure. Um, I never feel pressure to find a publisher. Like the last book came out in 2016. This book is out this year, so that's 7 years.
Mhm.
What do? I don't wallow in it. I submit and submit, and you get turned down until you find one. I know I'll always find one. In the meantime, I've got one 500-page manuscript on its final stages. I've got a 400-page manuscript on its final stages. I got stuff in the cupboard, right? And that
Yeah,
feels really
yeah.
good. Like the biggest
Okay.
fear is publishing a book and then going, oh my God, I've got nothing to, I gotta get going. That would be pressure, but
Mhm.
I've never in a hurry to publish. So to have a few big manuscripts I'm working on that are finished pretty much, I don't feel any pressure at all.
No, fantastic. I mean, fantastic because yeah, was like we can see as soon as the pressure's off, good stuff comes.
That's it. I don't know
Good
if I
stuff
can work under
comes.
that kind of pressure.
Yeah, yeah. Thank God.
That's the nice thing being with a small press too,
Mm,
because you don't have necessarily these deadlines, and there's not
mm.
thousands of dollars on the line. You go at your own pace. I
Yeah,
think
well,
if
they're
I
not
ever
trying to
wrote a book
punch
that
out
was a
books.
right, and
Mm.
have corporation down your back, no thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Searching for that summer read. No, that's really good. Let's turn back now to the story because I want to talk about Satan himself, the devil.
Yeah.
He's a really interesting character in this book because, and I will do my best not to spoil anything in the end, but he's actually, I had a lot of sympathy for him throughout the novel. Is this something you wanted to do? And why did you want to make, and if yes, why did you want to make Satan sort of a sympathetic character?
I didn't set out to make him sympathetic. I was determined, though, not to make him your typical Satan, the scary,
Mm,
you know, I wanted to make him vulnerable. Um,
yes.
and what I did was I wrote him I had an interview and they asked, what was my idea for Satan? He was like a snooty CEO, right?
Hmm.
Who's kind of trying to please everyone, including himself, right? On top
Hmm.
of him being incredibly selfish. So I it's one of those things where when you start writing a novel and the characters work, they just grow into themselves, and you just it's cliche, but you do follow where they go, and as you're writing, they develop themselves, and that's the character. Like I said, I didn't want to write this terrifying Satan, and once I started with that, he grew into himself.
No, fantastic. Out of all the characters, or maybe just the three main characters, Van Gogh, Satan, and Hemingway, who was your favorite to write?
Hemingway,
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, it was so
That's
much
good.
fun. I did zero research on Hemingway, like zero.
Really?
No research at all. There may have been like a date or something I may have picked,
Hmm.
but no research on Hemingway. I've loved him my whole life, and he was so much fun. I could write another book just with. I'm thinking of it already. Like it's kind of brewing. Like how do I get these two on a train again? Um, so yeah, no, Hemingway by far. Yeah.
Wow. That's that's good. No, I loved him as well. He was a great character. I love the way he sort of Satan had told his sort of side of the story, and then Hemingway would always have his own anecdote to sort of justify it in his own way. It was fantastic. And I was like, this just feels like Hemingway. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, he's just always drawing the story back to himself, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
literally, yeah.
Yeah.
So with a story like this, because it is sort of historical fiction in that you do go through humans' artistic history, was there a lot of research for you, because you do start basically at the beginning of human history, recorded history, and then work your way up to Van Gogh. Is there a lot of research in those days?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't know anything about Da Vinci, or I
Mhm.
really didn't know much about Monet. I could name paintings and things like that, but didn't know about where he was living at the time when he painted Magpie or whatever. Um, there's a lot of research for those characters. I would go online and check out articles and cross-reference. I read a couple books. I read a book called the history of Satan, which was a very interesting book about
Wow.
how evil became personified into this character as Satan. So there were a lot of things. I read the Van Gogh letters, of course. I read a
Hmm.
few books of the Van Gogh letters, um, and I would read something and go, oh, I could totally write this scene out that he's talking to Theo about. So yeah, there's a lot of research. I actually went to Auvers, um, outside of
Nice.
Paris.
Hmm.
So that those scenes where I ate at the Ravu Inn. They still serve the same meals from the 1890s. I
Oh,
went in Van Gogh's room. I made the walk to Gachet's house. You can go up, you can sit in the garden, you can go in the house. They have things like the pianos there. So I did all that. I went to the field. I stood in front of the church. I did a lot of I can't really call that research. That was just fun, right? But yeah, a lot of reading and a lot of notes.
did it, did doing those walks and eating in those same places really inspire you beyond Van Gogh's work and everything else? Was it also just sort of like a cathartic moment for you?
Yeah, it was I really felt like I was walking in his footsteps. I mean,
Wow.
to go into Gachet's garden is, it's stuff I never could have gotten from doing research, like in a book
Yeah.
or a website or anything, until you go and you sit in the garden, you see all the flowers and everything
Hmm.
there. To stand in front of the church, I didn't know. You would never have known that there was a brick wall. There's a brick wall where he kind of when he has an episode, he falls back and the brick wall supports him.
Hmm.
I never would have known that that wall was there, because I situated myself where I figured he would have stood when he painted the church. And it's essentially, there's a brick wall, a long brick wall that goes around the road, that I never would have known about. So things
Wow.
like that,
Yeah, the small details.
little details that
Yeah.
I never would have gotten from the book.
No, that's fantastic. Okay, last question about the book. It's about your writing style. How did you manage your writing style? This is your sixth book, so you've got your own writing style sort of very well established in your own mind. As you said, you would have read Van Gogh's letters, which, I mean, if anyone has read them, they will probably piss you off because it's unfair that he's that good an artist and that good a writer as well.
Right. Yeah.
And then you've got Hemmingway as well, who's got a very clear, distinct voice. So you've got all three of these characters, well, two of these characters and yourself featuring prominently throughout the book. How did you navigate all these sort of different clashings of writing styles?
Well, first of all, I just wrote the way I've been learning to write for the past 30
Mhm.
years, which I get a lot of it from Hemingway. Just tell the
Mhm.
story as simply as you can tell it. Um, that's all I try to do, is tell a story very simply. Now, when I was doing there's a scene where Hemingway explains his suicide, his own death,
Mm.
and I tried to write two pages, two big paragraphs, in this, like as if it was Hemingway writing it. That's the only time I um, tried to do that. I don't know if it worked or not, but I figured he was telling it, so I used the repetition and the visuals. But I don't know. I've been doing this for 30 years, and learning as I go,
Mhm.
and I've always found that the best way is the simplest way to tell the story. You can always tell when you start writing. I was 18 when I started to write, and you sit down to write a story, and you try to sound fancy. You try to sound, oh,
Mhm.
how would a writer write? And
Yeah.
then it's just a disaster, right? Unless you're a genius, which I'm not. So it took me 15, 20, 30, 40, 30 years to find out what my voice is, and it's just tell it as simply as I can.
No, fantastic. And I mean, I'm so glad you wrote this story because it's fantastic. I'm going to hold it up to the camera actually. So if anyone watches this on YouTube, look at that picture. That is fantastic. I mean, the artwork is what really drew me into the story when I first heard about it. My mind was blown with this story. It was so good. I think it's just sort of what I needed right when I needed it. So thank you so much for writing it and for
That's cool.
coming on the show today. It was so good to have you here, but you can't go anywhere just yet. I've got one more question.
Sure.
What is your favorite book?
For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway. I read
Wow.
it five
Okay.
times. By far my favorite book.
Very quick answer.
There are well, it's prepared. But I would answer that quickly no matter what.
Yeah.
It's my favorite. There are things I would love to change in that novel. Some of the dialogue that's written in old Spanish dialect was translate into like the Old English, which is a plan of mine someday when it goes to public domain and I can publish my own version of it. That's a long-term project to make a
Nice.
modern version of it. The other thing is the censors. There's no actual cursing or swearing in the novel. It'll literally say like, "What the unprintable are you talking about?" Right?
Yeah.
And I would love to see a version of that where it's just printed as it was what I think Hemingway would have written it as.
Hmm.
So someday I'll do that. Um, I love. I'm not a book snob where I don't like that because it's thriller or pulp fiction. Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett is
Yep.
one of the great books, and I love The Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth. It's
Oh,
just amazing thriller. Yeah, amazing book.
I've never heard of
It's like
that
the
one.
best. Oh, the Day of the Jackal.
Yeah.
Oh, it's known as the greatest thriller ever written.
Oh, wow.
It's phenomenal. Yeah, it's about the attempted assassination of Charles de Gaulle. It's brilliant.
Oh,
It's
sick.
brilliant.
Okay.
It's one of the greatest books ever.
Putting that on the list to be read then.
Yeah, it's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was, yeah, it was a great time. I almost wish we could have spoiled the book, but didn't need to do that so people can buy it and read it themselves and be, just fall in love with it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.